Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great works of English literature into gripping radio. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and today we're bringing you the final part in our 5-part adaptation of A Dream of Armageddon by H.G. Wells, a classic work of science fiction. In this story, our narrator has found himself seated on a train with a very interesting travel companion, a stranger who has been haunted by vivid dreams in which he seems to inhabit the life of another man hundreds of years in the future, returning to his life each night when he falls asleep. The man he becomes in his dreams was once a powerful politician, but he turned his back on the world in favor of a life of leisure with the woman he loved on the Italian resort island of Capri. In his absence, unscrupulous demagogic politicians have led the world into a disastrous war. Reduced to a powerless refugee, the once great man in the dream flees the war with his lover, but you can only run so far when the whole world is on fire.
As he neared the climax of his tale, my odd companion worked himself into a fervor, a flush of red filling his bloodless cheeks, his eyes staring wildly, as if at the memory of some horrific and scarring event.
A sort of soul blindness had me. Plainly I could see that we were being hemmed in, that the great net of that giant warfare had us in its toils. Many times we had seen the levy armies that had come down from the north going to and fro, making ways for the ammunition and preparing the mounting of the guns. Once we fancied that they had fired at us, taking us for spies, and at any rate a shot had gone shuddering over us. Several times we had hidden in the woods from hovering aeroplanes. But all these things do not matter now, those nights of flight and pain. We were in an open place near the great temples that faced them. At last, on a blank, stony place dotted with spiky bushes, empty and desolate and so flat that a grove of eucalyptus far away showed to the feet of its stems. How I can see it. My lady was sitting down under a bush, resting a little, for she was very weak and weary, and I was standing up, watching to see if I could tell the distance of the firing that came and went. They were still, fighting far from each other, with those terrible new weapons that had never before been used, guns that would carry beyond sight, and aeroplanes that would do, well, what they would do, no man could foretell. I knew that we were between the two armies. I knew that we were in danger and that we could not stop there and rest. Though all these things were in my mind, they were in the background. They seemed to be affairs beyond our concern. Chiefly, I was thinking of my lady. An aching distress filled me. For the first time, she had admitted herself beaten and had fallen weeping. Behind me, I could hear her sobbing, but I would not turn around. It was well, I thought, that she would weep and rest, and then we would toil on again, for I had no idea of the thing that hung so near. Even now, I could see her as she sat there, her lovely hair upon her shoulder, can mark again the deepening hollow of her cheek. If we had parted, she said, if I had let you go. No, I said, even now I will not repent. I made my choice and I will hold on to the end.
And then?
Overhead in the sky, something flashed and burst, and all about us I heard the bullets making a noise like a handful of peas suddenly thrown. They chipped the stones about us and whirled fragments from the bricks and passed.
He put his hand to his mouth and then moistened his lips.
At the flash I had turned about. She stood up and moved a step towards me, as though she wanted to reach me, and she had been shot through the heart.
He stopped and stared at me. I felt all that foolish incapacity an Englishman feels on such occasions. I met his eyes for a moment, and then stared out of the window. For a long space we kept silence. When at last I looked at him, he was sitting back in his corner, his arms folded, and his teeth gnawing at his knuckles. He bit his nails suddenly and stared at it.
I carried her towards the temple in my arms, as if it mattered. I don't know why. They seemed a sort of sanctuary, They had lasted so long. I suppose she must have died almost instantly. Only, I talked to her all the way.
Silence again. I spoke abruptly. I have seen those temples. Indeed, his words had brought those still sunlit arcades of worn sandstone very vividly before my eyes.
Then you know. It was the brown one, the big brown one. I sat down on the fallen pillar and held her in my arms. And after a little while, the lizards came out and ran about again, as though nothing unusual was going on, as though nothing had changed. It was tremendously still there, the sun high and the shadows still. Even the shadows of the weeds upon the entablature were still, in spite of the thudding and banging that went on all about the sky. I seem to remember that the aeroplanes came up out of the south, and that the battle went away to the west. One aeroplane was struck and fell. I remember that, though it didn't interest me in the least. It didn't seem to signify. It was like a wounded gull, flapping for a time in the water. I could see it down the aisle of the temple, a black thing in the bright blue water.
He paused, and then spoke again, unconvincingly as one who makes a trivial conversation.
The curious thing is that I didn't think. I didn't think at all. I sat with her in my arms amid the stones, in a sort of lethargy, stagnant. And I don't remember waking up back here home in Liverpool. I don't remember dressing that day. I know I found myself in my office with my letters all slit open in front of me, and that I was struck by the absurdity of being there, seeing that in reality I was sitting stunned in that temple with a dead woman in my arms. I read my letters like a machine. I have forgotten what they were about.
He stopped, and there was a long silence. Suddenly, I perceived that we were running down the incline from Chalk Farm to Euston. I started at this passing of time. I turned on him with a brutal question, with the tone of now or never. And did you dream again?
Yes. Once more, and as it were only for a few instants, I seemed to have suddenly awakened out of a great apathy, to have risen into a sitting position, and the body lay there on the stones beside me, a gaunt body. Not her, So soon, it was not her. I may have heard voices, I do not know. Only I knew clearly that men were coming into the solitude, and that was the last outrage. I stood up and walked through the temple, and then there came into sight first one man with a sallow face, dressed in a uniform of dirty white trimmed with blue, and then several, climbing to the crest of the old wall of the vanished city and crouching there. They were little bright figures in the sunlight, and there they hung, weapons in hand, peering cautiously before them. Presently, the man I had first seen stood up and shouted the command, and his men came toppling down the wall and into the high weeds around the temple. He came facing towards me, and when he saw me, he stopped. At first, I had watched these men with a mere curiosity, but when I had seen they meant to come to the temple, I was moved to forbid them. I shouted to the officer, "You must not come here," I cried. "I am here. I am here with my dead." He stared, and then shouted the question back to me in some unknown tongue. Presently, he came forward. He carried a drawn sword. I signed him to keep away, but he continued to advance. I told him again very patiently and clearly, "You must not come here. These are old temples, and I am here with my dead." He was so close. I could see his face clearly, the dull gray eyes and black mustache. He had a scar on his upper lip, and he was dirty and unshaven. He kept shouting unintelligible things at me. I know now that he must have been afraid of me, but at the time that did not occur to me. As I tried to explain to him, he interrupted me in imperious tones, bidding me, I suppose, to stand aside. He made to go past me, and I caught hold of him. I saw his face change in my grip. "You fool," I cried. "Don't you know? She is dead." He stared back and looked at me with a cruel eye. I saw a sort of exultant resolve leap into them, delight. Then, suddenly, with a scowl, he swept his sword back and thrust.
He stopped abruptly. I became aware of a change in the rhythm of the train. The brakes lifted their voices and the carriage jarred and jerked. This present world insisted upon itself, became clamorous. I saw through the steamy window huge electric lights glaring down from tall masts upon a fog, saw rows of stationary empty carriages passing by, and then a signal box, hoisting its constellation of green and red into the murky London twilight, marched after them. I looked again at his drawn features.
He ran me through the heart. It was with a sort of astonishment. No fear, no pain, but just amazement, that I felt it pierce me, felt the sword drive home into my body. It didn't hurt, It didn't hurt at all.
The yellow platform lights came into the field of view, passing first rapidly, then slowly, and at last stopping with a jerk. Dim shapes of men passed to and fro without.
Houston!
Do you mean?
There was no pain, no sting or smart, amazement and then darkness sweeping over everything. The hot, brutal face before me, the face of the man who had killed me, seemed to recede. It swept out of existence.
Houston! Houston!
The carriage door opened, admitting a flood of sound, and a porter stood regarding us.
A darkness. A flood of darkness that opened and spread and blotted out all things.
And that was the end? He seemed to hesitate. Then, almost inaudibly, he answered.
No.
You mean...
I couldn't get to her. She was there on the other side of the temple, and then...
Yes? Yes?
Nightmares. Nightmares indeed. My God. Great birds that fought and tore. And with that haunting final image, we find ourselves at the conclusion of this adaptation of A Dream of Armageddon here on BeFM Drama. We're left, as our narrator is left, wondering at the story told by this haggard dreamer, this vividly realized future life of a once great politician who traded power for love, following the thread of that decision down through the collapse of his civilization, and finally to the point of his death and that of the woman he loved. We hope that you've enjoyed our adaptation of this classic work of science fiction. From the studio in Busan, this is your host, Joshua Cornwell.